So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our next offering in our webinar series where we're going to talk about learning strategy. Our goal today is to help you understand how your organization can fit learning strategy into your L&D plans. My name is Marlene Saucier, and I'm Senior Director of Talent Networks and Partner Success here at TTA. At TTA, we've seen firsthand how valuable a solid learning strategy can be to an organization. Based on the fact that many of you are going through significant change within your organization, we felt that the information was timely, and we hope that it will provide you with some ideas that will help turn some of your learning dreams into action. So leading our discussion today is Jerry Geschwind. Jerry is a longtime learning consultant and friend of TTA who's been in the L&D industry for over 25 years. Early in his career at Accenture and as Vice President of Enterprise Learning Solutions at Global Knowledge, he was responsible for managing custom training development projects for enterprise clients. Over the years, his work has impacted notable organizations like Unum, Pfizer, Duke University, Kaiser Permanente, and IBM. Jerry is an innovator in the learning strategy space, creating award-winning learning programs for Fortune 500 corporations. Notably, TTA was honored to have partnered with Jerry on TTA's Brandon Hall for Leadership Excellence, which we were awarded in 2019. And serving in the role of Learning Strategy Sidekick is John Lavager, who is TTA's Director of Learning Solutions. John's been with TTA for over 12 years and is responsible for working with strategic clients to advise them on their high-stakes learning and development initiatives. John has supported significant learning programs that have helped companies to grow and guide them through change. So just a couple of announcements before we begin. We will be recording this session and sending the recording and the slide deck out at the end of the webinar. Also, we are going to be shutting the chat feature off during the session, so please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for any questions that you might have during the webinar. I just wanted to bring up a really cool feature in Zoom as well, is that you can actually like another question that's already been asked. So that question actually moves to the top of the page and gets answered a little sooner. Don't worry though, every question that is asked will be answered either during this session or as a follow-up. Jerry and John, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you so much, Marlene. And thank you everyone for joining us. My name is John Lavager. I'm actually really excited that we're talking about learning strategy today. So this is an area where I've regularly gotten questions over the years like, what are the deliverables from a learning strategy? Or we have a lot of L&D expertise in-house. How can a learning strategist help us? So that's why I'm really looking forward to having Jerry provide some clarity around what learning strategy entails and to help bring some of the benefits into focus for us. So Jerry has worked closely with many of our clients in the development of their learning strategies, which has really helped them achieve the results they were looking for. That said, I'm hopeful that some of the insights that Jerry shares in today's session will be useful for some of your learning initiatives as well. As for the structure of today's webinar, Jerry has prepared a presentation for us, and I'll be weaving in your questions and perhaps a few of my own throughout the presentation, so please don't hold back. If we have any time remaining afterwards, we'll focus specifically on answering some additional questions. And finally, just to reiterate what Marlene shared, please use the Q&A functionality and upvote any questions that you find interesting that some of the other participants may have shared, and that'll help us prioritize. So thanks again, everyone. And with that, Jerry, I'll let you get started.
Well, thanks, John. I'm super excited to be here as well. It's always fun to talk about what you do, which John and I were talking about this a few weeks ago. He said, hey, can you come on and help us demystify learning strategy a little bit? And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. So why don't we advance a couple of slides into, I think the first slide, there I am, hey, a little bit, my more formal picture. So hi, everybody. And maybe just a little bit more background. I've been in the field for over 25 years. And one thing you should know about me is I've got a sort of a balance, and every learning strategist is really different, right? That's one thing I hope to take away from this. My background is sort of a combination of deep instructional design and even academic background around instructional design. I have a master's in learning sciences from Northwestern. and then also experience running consulting operations around learning. So I've got sort of like an operational sort of business mindset too. So like the services I bring to bear kind of try to combine those two things. And I think the result of that is practical solutions to strategic problems around learning. So that's how I've tried to put my background together. And I think if you worked with learning strategists before, or if you work with other learning strategists, you'll find that we all have unique talents. And so that's one of the interesting things about learning strategy and learning strategy work. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. John, you want to say anything more about your background, or what do you think?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I've been with TTA now a little over 12 years, and it's been a multifaceted role. I mean, everything from business development and new hire sales onboarding and product management. And today, really, I'm focusing more on some of our more complex deals and helping those get launched, and supporting the other sales reps, and also supporting some of our more strategic accounts. So very, very excited about the session today. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, John. All right, so next slide. Great, so here's what we'll cover today. I want to make sure that you come away understanding what some of the benefits of a learning strategy are, typical types of analyses. So what do we do? What do you end up getting at the end of a learning strategy engagement? And then we'll get into some specific examples. So I'll talk about 3 different recent learning strategy engagements, and just tell you a little bit about them, so that you can kind of understand from the ground up how a learning strategy engagement works and what happens. And then just how to partner with a learning strategist like myself. So what's the nature of the work? How would we work together, and what would the project look like? So before I jump into, and I've kind of organized this talk around 4 key questions. I'm going to start with the most basic, which is, what is learning strategy, right? Good place to start. But before I try to answer that question, I'd like to hear from all of you. We're going to put up a poll question, and it's going to ask you about your previous experience, any previous experience you've had working with a learning strategist. And we'll give you a couple minutes, or a few seconds to answer that poll. So just go ahead and respond, and let's see how that turns out. Okay. All right, a few more responses coming in. Okay. All right, so here we go. So 22%. This is, I think, roughly what I expected. Certainly on the 22% yes. I was guessing if you were here, you might not all of you would have worked with learning strategists before, but many of you had. And a lot of no's, of course, which is great. So I hope you guys, when you're finished with the presentation today, you'll have a clearer idea of what we do, and maybe you'll have an experience in the future working with one. And that not sure is a pretty big number, though. That was not exactly what I expected. So that's interesting. So maybe at the end of this presentation, you'll have a better idea whether or not you actually had worked with a learning strategist or not. But it's it can be defined a lot of different ways. So I can understand that response, because certain things might seem like strategy, but maybe they're not, and who knows. So I'll explain it in my words, in my definition, and then you can decide for yourself. So. Okay, so let's turn to the first question. So what is learning strategy? So I have a lot of kids, and I have to explain what I do every once in a while. And if you're in the learning field, I think a lot of us sometimes struggle with this a little bit when little kids ask us what we do. It's like really, or just anybody actually. It's sometimes a little challenging. You do training. What do you do training on? And it just kind of goes from there. It's really kind of difficult to answer. So I try to boil it down. I've had a lot of practice, answering this question in simple terms. So when I think of learning strategy, the simplest way I can explain it is it's the process of explaining how and why you are going to do something before you do it, right? And that sounds like common sense. Like, why wouldn't you do that all the time? But in life and in business, I mean, we often just jump into stuff and start doing things. It's sometimes we're under pressure to produce results or show that we're getting things done, so we'll just start rushing and going to the solution before we've really defined the problem or before we understand what our goals are. So one way to think of learning strategy is like hitting the pause button and saying, okay, wait a second, before we're going to do something important, let's make sure we all understand, like have a common understanding of like how we're going to accomplish this stuff and why we're doing it in the first place. And the why question is maybe even the more important question, right? Because it's sometimes when I get into a learning strategy engagement, start talking to clients, people don't have that super well defined. They want to improve their level of engagement, or they want to maybe make more money. They want people to understand how to talk to their customers more articulate fashion. But then when I ask, I just ask a few whys to that, they sometimes don't come up with the answers. So it's important to ask those questions right up front, and then doing that through a learning strategy engagement where you can really get clarity on where you're heading. When I think about, you always have an alternative here, right? You could do that, or you could not do that. You could fail to just not hit the pause button and just race ahead, right? And just get things done. But there are, I would say there are some real benefits to hitting the pause button and thinking about this before you jump in. One is that your solution is going to be probably more innovative. If you work with a learning strategist, you bring someone with outside expertise in to help you answer these questions, then they're going to bring ideas that you may not have inside your organization. So that's one thing that I think I find that I can bring to a company who maybe their thinking might be sort of rooted in their industry or rooted in their past experiences, right? So I work with all different types of organizations, universities, small companies, large companies, and some of the problems I see and solutions I see in all those arenas are great for cross-pollinating. So I'll often see like a solution in a university that works really well in a manufacturing firm, right? And that's how you get creativity and innovation. Another thing I see, companies benefiting from when it comes to learning strategy is prioritization. So a lot of the clients I work with have great ideas, but they have a lot of them, and sometimes it makes sense to focus on the ones that are going to provide the most impact in the shortest amount of time. So with a learning strategist experience, having seen a lot work and not work, you can help a client predict which of those ideas are more likely to have an impact or more likely to be successful, depending on the other things going on in the company too, other business drivers and constraints. So helping to prioritize all that stuff is also another big benefit. And then another one of the biggest benefits really is risk mitigation. So throughout my career, like all of us, I think, made tons of mistakes and learned a lot from all those mistakes. And I've seen a lot of other people make tons of mistakes, even, more than me. And so, having seen all of that horror, I can, hopefully help prevent you from running into those same pitfalls that I've seen I myself or others have run into over and over and over again. So it's sometimes that the phrase is to see around corners. You hear that a lot. And that's what I feel like, working with a learning strategist can help you see around corners and just help you avoid those mistakes that you're likely to run into.
All right, awesome, Jerry. I'll jump in now.
Yeah.
So we have Michelle. I see your question. I think that'll be best suited answered on the next slide. So let's give that one just a minute. And I have a question from Josh. He says, how do you balance a tactful approach when dealing with L&D or talent folks in an organization who are more reactionary to business leader needs and don't want to dig into get the why from the business leaders? How do you coach them to the why?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do run into this. You hear it, I'd say, expressed most commonly when you start providing assessment results and you say, well, here's what I'm seeing kind of going wrong here, or recommendations. Here's some ideas I think I have for moving things forward. And then you hear, well, we haven't done that because of X, Y, and Z, or we can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. So you get maybe the word is resistance or excuses or limiting thinking, right? And I think that sounds like what you're getting at there, Josh. That there are in an L&D organization, there's often a lot of pressure to get things done, and not willingness to sort of hit the pause button, like I've been saying. And you know, the result of that then is resistance when you present new ideas, new thinking. So one of the things, I'll get into this, but I try to help people visualize the future. So you know, instead of just saying, well, you know, you ought to mix some, you know, you ought to mix a combination of modalities into your learning program, so that it's not just all classroom, or it's not just a choice of classroom and web, and this, you know, you could blend them together differently. You might hear back from that, well, we tried that and we can't do that, or we don't have the resources for that. But it, you know, instead of just saying you should do that, I kind of say, well, now here's what your world will look like. And what I try to do too is to when I paint that picture, and again, I'll get into a little bit how to do that, but I paint that picture in a way that also shows how it makes the L&D functions lives easier and more fulfilling and more interesting. So I guess short answer to your question would be, when designing a learning experience, taking into account not just the learner, but also some of the things that go around the learner, including the people that have to build and maintain and deliver content, which is often your L&D organization.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm going to sneak a question in here. So
yeah.
what factors should learning leaders think about when trying to choose a learning strategist? Mm-hmm. So how do you decide between different candidates that are being considered?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. One thing I think to consider is you know, the sort of the nature of the questions you're trying to answer. In some cases, you might have questions that you want answered as an organization that might require some specialized knowledge, right? So a quick example that comes to mind is like a health and safety organization. And you might have a health and safety curriculum that you want to redo, right? So you have it, it's running, it's somewhat successful, but let's say it has problems, and you know, maybe you're having difficulty with tracking and level of engagement, level of completion, and yeah, but you want someone who really understands health and safety, right? Who can speak the health and safety language, and who maybe has knowledge of sources of content and, you know, rules and regulations and that sort of thing. You know, then that you want to look for a learning strategist in that case that might have at least have some experience, you know, having done several health and safety type related engagements. On the flip side, you also want to consider how much innovation does your solution require? Like, if you feel like the questions you're answering are quote unquote not rocket science, and you really just need a good basic strategy to get from point A to point B, then I think that the specialized knowledge person or someone who might have familiarity with your industry is probably a good way to go. But if you're really looking for like an innovative solution, you might want somebody with breadth of expertise, someone who may not know anything about your industry, for example, but might have experience with lots and lots of different industries across sectors, and can bring creative ideas into your company that you haven't thought of before. So that's it really depends on, I think, John, what your you know, the flavor of the objectives of the specific line situation.
All right, awesome. I think we have a couple more questions, but I think they'll probably be best served on the next slide.
Okay. All right. So another question I get a lot is, what does a learning strategist do? This is my take on it. So if you ask 10 learning strategists, what do they do? I think you'll get 10 pretty different answers, because we all have different, you know, we focus on different things. And this isn't everything that I do, but these are the most common things that I get involved in. And I would say, just at a high level, I tend to focus on learning programs, right? So you know, large groups of courses that work together to deliver outcomes, right? You know, other learning strategists you'll find might focus on learning organizations, right? And how to optimize an organization. So I think we all tend to have different sort of specialties and focuses, but this is mine. So a lot of this you'll hear when I talk through some of these deliverables, they generally relate to, you know, like large, complex, strategic learning programs. One of the most common things I do is assessments. So I'm going to go through, these are just sort of the deliverables that I produce whenever I do a learning strategy engagement. And I don't always produce all of them, and sometimes only do one. It sort of just depends on client need, right? Assessment's a good example. So a client has an existing program and they think there's some stuff wrong with it, and they have some ideas for what might be wrong with it, but they would like to find out really what's wrong with it, somebody like myself can come in and really help with that question. So I will interview people and analyze data and materials and come back with here's what's wrong with it, and then here's kind of where the opportunities for fixing it might be as well. So I'll do that when you have an existing program. Some clients don't have an existing program; they want to start something new. So then we don't do an assessment. We kind of skip to the next step, which is a program definition. A program definition really just says if you're going to produce this is generally done for new learning programs. So if you want to give a high level explanation, let's say to an executive sponsor team, and clearly articulate, hey, we have an idea for this learning program. Here's who we're going to be teaching. Here are the learning objectives. Here are the outcomes for the business. Here's sort of how the high level mechanics of it are going to work, and why it's worth investing in. Right? It's usually the reason for doing something like this. It's usually PowerPoint, high level, 10 to 15 slides. And I work collaboratively with the client to try to define all the make sure all the high level questions about a learning program are answered and presented in a way that will hopefully be compelling to an executive team that's looking to do something new. The next piece, often done in conjunction with the program definition, is a business case. So this usually, as you can imagine, is a spreadsheet or a spreadsheet summarized by a PowerPoint slide. And a business case just simply takes a look at what the cost would be over time, and then what the net investment return would be of a learning initiative over time. It might also it's not always quantitative. Sometimes it's more of a business impact assessment. So if we're looking, some organizations feel like, well, if we can just change these behaviors, that's good enough for us. We're willing to invest a certain amount of money, knowing that those behaviors are changed. We're not really sure exactly to the penny what that's going to return on the business, but we know it's worth, let's say, if we can invest $600,000 and to get all the salespeople to do X differently, we know that's going to generate some revenue. So it's sort of, again, depends on what we're talking about. But a business case, again, often in conjunction with the program definition, sort of helps tease up, okay, here's what we want to do going forward. The next step, and this is probably the most common thing that I do, is a learning experience design. Learning experience design paints a high-level picture of what a new or a transformed learning program looks like. Usually, it focuses on the learner's journey through the program, but often it also includes the back-end view, like what does it look like to look at the reporting and analyze it, react to it, change content. So again depends on client needs. It's an interesting exercise to go through. What I typically will do is define different roles or personas, and then I often write out stories about those people as they go through, and do all of it based on the findings from that assessment that came before it, or any analysis that might have come before, so that we're making sure that learning experience is addressing the goals and objectives of the client. Another sort of natural next step from a learning experience design is a curriculum plan. So once you've got a good idea what that learning experience looks like, you can take a deep dive into either your existing curriculum or build a new one. And a curriculum plan, it's not pretty, but it's super valuable. And if you're an instructional designer or a learning strategist, your curriculum plans can provide a lot of warm comfort on cold evenings, because they itemize every single thing that you're going to be doing in your curriculum, providing information about prerequisite courses, durations, modalities, and all the information basically that you will need to answer the next deliverables questions, which is the implementation plan. So it's really difficult sometimes if you're launching a new program to understand how when you can launch it, how long it's going to take to build, what the resources are, if you don't know everything that's in the curriculum plan. So how long are things going to take to teach, and who's going to deliver it, what the facilitation model is, and everything on a course by course basis. So the curriculum plan provides you sort of with the shopping list. The implementation plan provides you with the budget and the time frame for actually getting it done. And then one last piece that I like to call out, sometimes it's kind of a part of some of the other deliverables, but I like to call it out separately just so we don't forget about it in the context of an engagement with a lot of things going on, is a measurement approach. It's often I find that when I start digging into an existing learning program, the approach to measuring that program is far from perfect. There's usually surveys that aren't the best, that could be could produce more actionable data, or attempts to measure things other than learner perception that just never were followed through with for whatever reason. And so a measurement approach can help kind of reset everybody and get everybody focused on, okay, how are we going to figure out whether or not this this program is making an impact. And so that deliverable is usually a smaller one, and it usually describes how people are measuring things today, what are the available vehicles for measurement, why we want to measure certain things, and then a plan for doing that. So laying out, okay, here's how we're gonna collect baseline data, and here's what we're gonna do sort of later on. So again, I like people to not forget about that because I think it's important for people to come away from a learning initiative knowing something about the effect that they had.
All right, awesome. So Michelle, I want to make sure that we addressed your question. I think we likely did, but if we didn't, please contact us again in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure we address it. And then we have a couple questions here. So Randall asks, can you provide more distinction between a learning strategy and a learning strategic plan? Are they the same? My experience is that a strategic plan becomes so complex, it loses its impact and even the attention of organizations' executive leadership.
Yeah, well, it's hard for me to make that distinction without maybe understanding better what you mean by a learning strategic plan. But if it's as complicated as you're saying, then I certainly understand your concern and what maybe you've experienced in the past. It does get at, something that I try to do, which is to keep things kind of simple. You can certainly overcomplicate things. Now there's certain things that are inherently complicated, like a curriculum plan. If you have, 600 courses that you need to deliver, then that's going to have 600 rows on that spreadsheet. And you can only make that so pretty. But when you do a learning experience design, for example, or program definition, it has to have a value. There has to be a value in its ability to communicate the ideas to senior leaders in many cases. So if you overcomplicate it and put too much detail in it, and yet it's being thorough, you are going to lose senior executives, and they're not going to understand what you're trying to accomplish. So I guess I try to keep things sort of straightforward. I use make things as visual as I can. And tell stories, about the future, and help people clearly envision what it is they're getting into. But I'd say, again, I'm not sure I can draw the distinction, but I can certainly tell you that as a strategist, I look to keep things simple. And if you're looking to work with a strategist, a good tactic is just to ask them for some sample work and see how complicated it looks. I mean, is it written in plain English? Is it visual? Or is it all sort of gobbledygook and loaded down with a lot of details that aren't helpful?
Awesome. And then we have L. O'Connor asking, does a learning strategy include a plan for follow-up assessment of training participant knowledge retention and utilization?
I'd say that would fall in the bucket of a measurement approach. And that's something I do recommend frequently, right? I think there seems to be a tendency to measure the event, to measure, what happened after class executes, what happened after class. What do people think of it, right? But I often recommend that people take a much longer view of measurement. Even in knowledge checks, most people will say, I want to make sure people understood what was done in class. So they'll put out an assessment, after the class or right after any learning module, let's say, and then see what people remember, like right after they learned it. I always recommend people try to, if they can, do that 2, 3, 4 weeks later. Then you're measuring people forgot, which to me is a lot more interesting than what people remember, because then you're down to, okay, what the few things after they forgot, what were the last things they remembered, and then why if they forgot things that were important, now you've got a problem to solve. So to me, that's more interesting.
All right, we got one more question for this section.
Yeah.
So do you have a particular style or approach to strategy that you consider unique?
I do. I'm going to get into it, but I'll answer it quickly. It's I like to work collaboratively and iteratively. So, and I don't think that's the right, necessarily just the right way to do it, and you shouldn't ever do it another way. But you know, it's a more agile approach, I think. So I like to share things when sometimes when they're half finished, or work together side by side with the client to kind of flesh something out. I think it's important that a learning strategy often have the buy-in and the contribution of the people that I work with in the client organization. So it's hard to do that if you you know, interview everybody, then go away for 3 weeks, then come back with a pretty presentation saying here are the answers. And I guess it's my philosophy is that also sort of runs the risk of you getting, you know, missing out on some really interesting and important input that you might get if you are involving the client at every stage.
Awesome. And we had one more just come in from Sindhu. He's asking, most of our clients are interested in understanding the ROI and impact of a learning strategy. What are the metrics you consider to measure?
Right. So it's interesting. I actually find that there's often interest in ROI at the beginning of a project, and that interest sometimes fades once the project is launched and is viewed as successful by executives and learners. So I have quite a bit of difficulty getting people to focus on ROI. And I'm also not so sure that ROI is always the best measure. You know, ROI, you know, in financial terms is a measurement of your return on investment. Usually that's an investment that appreciates in value. Training and learning, I mean, is more often by the finance people viewed as an expense. So not really something that appreciates. So I tend to, when I get into this discussion about the return and what your expected outcomes are, I'll often focus the client on behavior change as opposed to ROI. And I sometimes get a lot farther with that because if you think about it in terms of sales training, right? Because sales training is just sort of easy in terms of numbers and finances. If you could say, all right, try to make a case that, well, if I improve salesperson productivity by 10%, I would generate, $8 million for the organization. And then you'd say, well, therefore, if I'm going to generate $8 million, it's worth investing, $800,000 in my sales training initiative. And if you take that to the CFO will say, gee, that's great. Can you do it for 50,000 now? Can you get the same, can you get the same results for less, right? And I feel like that's the pressure it seems that the learning organizations are always under, right? So when you get in that dollars and cents calculation, sometimes it just doesn't, the conversation sort of falls apart. So I guess I like to try to focus the question on what sales behaviors are we trying to change that we know are going to have a great impact. It might be 8 million, it might be 3 million, it might be 2 million, but we just know if they're prospecting differently, they're going to be generating a lot more sales. And focus on those behavior changes, and because the behavior changes are way easy to measure on the back end, right? You can usually, especially salespeople, there's a lot of metrics and tracking. You can usually figure it out. So I guess I sort of avoided your question a little bit, but in my experience, sometimes the more productive conversation is about business impact and behavior change.
Awesome. We have one more question, but I think it's more appropriate for another slide, so I think we can move on.
Sure. All right. So I thought, in a conversation about learning strategy, it would be fun to talk about some actual client work, and in an effort to answer the question of how do organizations benefit from a learning strategy, right? So the first one I'd like to talk about is Unum. Unum is a Fortune 500 insurance company. I've had the pleasure of working with Unum for several years. And our strategy initiative turned into a very successful leadership development program that TTA won a Brandon Hall Silver Award for. So we're really proud of the results that came out of the program. the challenge that Unum had was they have a group of about 1,000 mid-level managers, and they didn't have a formal fundamental skills program for those managers. And a lot of those managers were promoted because they were really good at the insurance business, and had great insurance business skills, but maybe not as much the people management and leadership skills that they would really need to be successful at the next level. So what I did as part of my work, my strategy work with Unum, was make sure that we identified what the key skill needs were based on some existing work that they had already done. We sort of culled through it and came up with, okay, here are the 4 key areas that we need to focus on, and then design a learning experience based on that was targeted for a learning experience platform. So we decided early on that in order for the program to be scalable and cost effective, that it would need to be an online program, not a classroom-based program. But Unum wanted it also to be a social program as well, so not completely done on an individual basis. So through a learning experience platform and through the experience design that we put together, and just through a lot of hard work and get into the details, we built a 12-month leadership program that runs in cohorts, about 10 to 20 people at a time. And the program was so successful, it generated so much interest that typically we get 400 or 500 folks a year running through the program at any given time. The learning experience design helped Unum make sure the program was modular. So it's been repurposed into sort of individual focused tracks of learning that people can take, as opposed to the whole thing. So there's different options for people, which I think is one of the reasons that makes it pretty popular. So we got I think an 80% or higher, maybe 80 to 90% rating on managers who report that they're applying the skills down the road that they learned in the program, which is something we were looking for as well. So that was really successful. Enterprise is an interesting story in light of our pandemic, actually. So I worked with Enterprise closely. They're a provider of business education to small businesses, particularly minority and women-owned businesses. So this is as you can imagine, a group that's been hit really hard by the pandemic. And before all that, though, their idea was, well, they have a flagship business skills program, but they wanted to do more of it online and tap into their membership, that their sort of alumni network from that program, with more like continuing education sort of offerings. And so I built a expansive learning experience design and some other sort of strategic advice around that for them. And then when the COVID sort of hit right in the middle of the project, we kind of like put that all the work sort of on pause for a little bit. We just got back together and did a checkpoint. And what I've learned is the strategy that we put in place for them to help tap into their membership and help get online offerings sort of in place is actually helping them right now cope with this economic disaster, because their members really need help in this time, very specific help in staying afloat and sort of powering through what's going on. And so Enterprise is rapidly executing on some of the ideas from the learning strategy to help their members, and they're releasing new offerings. So it's really exciting to see the strategy, not the way we intended it would be implemented, but being implemented in pieces like in the near term to sort of cope. And then finally, with Duke University, I've been working with Duke University for about 6 years now, and doing various things with them. But one of the interesting things we did was they had a need to deliver clinical research education to countries where there is greater access to patients for clinical trials. So if you think about it, in the U.S., if you have a clinical trial that you want to run for a disease that's really rare, it can be really hard to find patients, and when you do, it can be very expensive to acquire them for a trial. In a place like China or Vietnam or Russia, you can find many more patients and have a lower cost of acquisition. So physicians and healthcare institutions in these other countries are really interested in getting clinical research education, and Duke is one of the best in terms of providing clinical research and biostatistical education. So I worked with Duke to come up with a business model to come up with a learning experience. We devised a blended experience that includes e-learning, virtual seminars, and an immersive 5-day workshop where students learn to plan a research study. And we piloted this with a hospital in China. It was incredibly successful on its first run, and they contracted for a 5-year program from there on. We're in the middle of our second year, I think, right now, so it's going really well. We're a little hiccup with COVID, so we're trying to cope with virtual delivery and hopefully get back to delivering our live workshops soon. But it's been really impactful for those folks, and we're hopeful that those researchers can now research diseases in these countries and help us all stay well. So that's been really fulfilling.
All right, awesome. So a quick question for you: when you think about all of the clients that you work with, what are you seeing as the most common problems or pitfalls out there?
Okay. So I would say one of the things I run into more often than not is when I'll jump into a client situation, John, like at any point, right? And sometimes it's a little bit later, sometimes a little bit earlier. Usually I come in just a little bit later than I wish I had, if that makes any sense. And at that point I join. What often people say is, well, we're really interested in improving this, this training program. And so, we realize we need to modernize it. It's antiquated. So we've gone ahead and we've bought a learning management system and blah, 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 blah from there. And so it's sort of like there's a jump into action. It's sort of what I said before, where technology sort of seems to come before the thought process of, okay, well, who are we teaching? What are we teaching? Why? How? What's the learning experience going to be like? So I guess I would encourage people who are facing these initiatives to really think through a lot of the other questions before you start looking at learning management systems and learning experience platforms and e-learning development tools, because there's so much out there, and the types of tools and infrastructure that you need to support your learning experience might be really different if you kind of go through, it doesn't take long really, but go through the answering of those key questions up front.
And actually, Ryan's question is pretty related to what you just said, so
yeah.
I want to make sure we address the nuances here. He asked, what is the best way to start working with a strategist before the LD module is up and running, or waiting until after they have some content?
Before is way better. I work with a lot of clients who have programs that have gone into disrepair, and I mean, it's always helpful to obviously get involved and try to fix it, but you always wonder, you always think, man, I wish I was here beforehand, and I could have helped avoid some of this stuff. So the earlier the better. And another reason I say that is, at least the way I work, I can go away and come back. Like, I don't have to hang around, right? So you can, meet, if you're real early and you don't have a lot to do, you're just thinking through some of the basic questions, or you just want to get a handle on, what might be wrong with an existing program. I can come in and just do that piece, right? And if you're not ready to keep going, that's fine. That's the great thing of working with a consultant. Consultant goes away, and then you can just call the consultant back at any time you're ready to sort of move to the next step. So I would say don't wait till you have all your ducks in a row. Just go ahead and open the conversation and see what the strategist can do in the near term, even if it's kind of a small piece. That might actually go a long way.
So you brought up an LMS, folks will sometimes jump into the technology first. In relation to that, what role does learning technology play in your work?
Oh, good question. So what I found is, as a learning strategist, and this might also sort of be an answer to an earlier question, which is, making distinctions between different learning strategies. So one of my specialties I haven't really talked about much is I do have a fair amount of expertise with learning technology and e-learning. And so I do work with a lot of clients who have an interest in moving programs online and scaling them. And I guess what I found is having some command over the details of learning technology is very helpful as a strategist, because I know sort of what's feasible and what's not feasible, and it keeps me from recommending things to people that just aren't going to execute well, or are going to be costly or tedious or anything like that. So I guess helps ground you in reality. So if you know that technology is going to be a part of your solution one way or the other, and you know that one of the things you're really trying to accomplish is to scale and move things online, you want a learning strategist that's got some background in that. I think that helps. Otherwise, you might have to work with sort of multiple people and pull them together and have them work together, which is could be fine too, but maybe a little less efficient.
All right, great. That's all our questions for this slide.
Okay. We can move on to the next one. And right before I jump into this last question, I want to hear from our audience again on another poll question. And this time, now that I've talked a little bit about the deliverables, the things that I do as a strategist, and some of the things that I've been able to do with some specific clients, I want to hear from you about what are some of your interests and things you want to improve in your learning and development plans. So we're going to pop a poll question up there and see and see where you guys are in your journey and the things that you're interested in. We'll give everybody a couple seconds here to answer. Responses are piling in. Very interesting. Okay, a few more responses are trickling in, so we'll give it another second or two. Okay. Well, there we get it. Well, our winner is improved learner engagement. I'm not sure I would have predicted that, but I know that comes up a lot with my clients. So that's probably also why I do learning experience design quite a bit. So for those of you that are faced with that problem, I would suggest a learning experience design, an exercise like that would really help you figure out how to improve your learner engagement. Looks like improving efficiencies as well. And understanding the scale. Those are two very common. I find those very common questions. We've got problems with the program, but we're not exactly sure the nature of the problem and where the solution ought to go. So a pretty even distribution, it looks like. That's good. Okay. Well, I wanted to wrap up with just, I get a lot of questions about, well, what is it like to work with you? How does an engagement feel, right? And what are the steps we go through? And they're, fairly predictable, maybe what you might guess. But I'll just go through real quick. Usually there's a kickoff. Usually that's some kind of face-to-face or virtual meeting where we just make sure we're clear on what we're going to do and the scope and the time frame, and then we usually, and a really important step in a kickoff meeting usually is defining what we're going to analyze and who we're going to talk to. So most of the time when I begin a learning strategy engagement, I have to figure out what's going on. Whether or not I'm doing an assessment, I still have to understand the goals and what people want to accomplish and what some of the constraints are. That usually involves interviews and looking over a bunch of documents. So we figure out what all that stuff is in the kickoff meeting. And then I go to work in the analysis piece. And the analysis is where I kind of clear my mind, I have an open mind to any and everything. And I talk to people and I find out what's going on and I review ugly looking reports and ugly looking content and try to look for patterns, try to figure out, what might be the root cause of problems and just start thinking it through. But mainly I'm keeping an open mind and trying to capture the as is scenario or the as is perceptions of folks. And as I get to the end of analysis, I start to synthesize and come up with some of my own opinions and conclusions based on experience, based on patterns I'm recognizing. And I start to share that with the client to see what they think. Are these things that they knew about already, or are they a little bit different than what they expected, and why? And we have a sort of a dialogue about it. And then finally, we turn that synthesis into something that's easy to communicate and present to whatever the relevant audience might be, whether that be a executive sponsor committee, or whether that be the leadership of a training organization. But we present the findings, And then the presenting of findings is usually here's what we found, here's the deliverable, here's what we recommend, and here like what we recommend are the next steps where you might want to go from here, or where we might go together from here.
All right, excellent. So first question I have for you is, for those in our audience that are in the midst of a learning initiative and aren't certain about the help they need, what would you say are the signs that they should be looking, that they may need a learning strategist and that may be beneficial?
I would say the main thing that I hear when I'm like in this, I often discover this after I engage with a client. They'll say, I'm so glad we're working with you now. I felt like we were rushing. So I'd say that's the number one thing. If you feel like people are starting to do stuff and you're wondering whether or not they're doing the right things, whether or not they're doing things that are purposeful, then it might be time to call the learning strategy hotline. So that's a good symptom. Another one is if you're sort of stalled in planning and you're having a lot of trouble getting people to agree on what to do, or you having trouble getting funding for something that you think is really important, and there's like this, you have this idea for this new program, but it never seems to go anywhere. A learning strategist like myself can really help you crystallize that and get you, sort of by again trying to explain what you're going to do and how you're going to do it before you actually do it. Can really help you communicate that clearly and crisply and get that planning stage done with, so you can move on with the initiative itself. So that's sort of the two things that come to mind, John.
Okay. And I get this question a lot from clients. How long does a learning strategy engagement take to execute?
Yeah, so the standard consultant answer for that is it depends, right? But I would say generally like 2-3 months. And that's generally driven by not by how much time it takes me to do things, but it's usually driven by availability of people. In a learning strategy engagement, you often have to talk to important, busy people that don't have time for you. So that takes time to schedule them and all that. And then oftentimes you're presenting your results to people who are also important and busy, and it takes time to schedule that. It takes time for them to review what you've done, and it's all just sort of understandable. So that the reviewing and scheduling, of meetings and interviews with the actual client personnel tends to drag things out longer than they need to. So but it's fine. And then sometimes it's better because when you give the client time to think about things, sometimes other insights come to bear, which are, really helpful. So.
Great. Yeah. And when you're working with a client, how important is it that you have specialized industry experience or domain knowledge?
Yeah, so we sort of touched on that before. In my work, I often don't have any domain knowledge, and for me, it's actually a lot of fun because I get to learn about the domain. Right? If the client trusts me based on my learning expertise, one of the things that I find really fulfilling about L&D work, right, is that you get to learn about a new organization and how they operate. Like I'm working right now at a TTA client I'm working with now as a community college. I've never worked with a community college before. I don't really know much about community colleges, and it's just fun to learn about them, right? So that's, so from my standpoint, it doesn't, it doesn't sort of hold me back or sort of hinder anything. And then in other cases though, I do have some specialized knowledge. So I've done a lot of leadership development work. And so I have a working knowledge of, a lot of the leadership development models and training approaches and, sort of expectations of the audience. And that, I would say that helps me move a little faster on those projects when, maybe the problem is a little bit more well understood as to where the client's heading. So, I think I'll go back to what I said before. When you're looking for creative and innovative, it probably matters less. When you're looking for to get something, get your strategy done kind of efficiently and you feel like it's, like I said, like not rocket science what you're trying to accomplish, then sometimes that industry experience can really help move things along.
Excellent. And Sindhu just asked a question. Leadership training is one of the crucial components of any organization.
Yeah.
Do you foresee any change in strategy building for the leadership coaching segment post-pandemic?
So leadership training and then coaching are kind of sort of two separate things. So I am less familiar with coaching, although I have some familiarity with the coaching market and how that's going. All I'll say about that is it does seem like coaching is becoming a lot more important and a lot more valued at lower levels in the organization. But that's one I'm still, kind of keeping my eye on. From a leadership development perspective, or from a training perspective, that is, it's a very exciting place to be right now, because it seems to me after decades that companies are finally starting to recognize that they need to make significant investments in scalable frontline management training, where they have for years have invested in upper echelons of management. I want to say a study I saw said that 60% of training budgets go to like senior management. It's sort of obscene, right? If you think about it, middle managers are often left, to sort of fend for themselves and trial by fire. People always say, "I'm drinking from the fire hose," like sink or swim, and all those cliches. And with I guess with advances in technology, it's making it a little bit easier to provide high quality leadership development education for new managers and frontline, like 1 to 5 year experienced managers. And so there's great interest in this, and I'd say the providers of content in that space are probably shoring up their defenses and thinking things through a little bit, because I think there's some of these technologies that are out there, these learning experience platforms that come to mind, for example, are disrupting things a little bit, making it really easy, much easier to get content in the hands of managers without, going through a sort of prescribed formal program, through just content curation, for example, finding useful articles and then asking people to do activities based on those articles. This is basically what we've done at Unum, and people are able to do this really quickly and inexpensively. And I think that's shaking things up a bit, and it's exciting to watch it develop.
All right, awesome. I think that's all we got for questions.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all I had today. I really enjoyed spending time with everybody, and like I said, hope you came away with a better understanding of learning strategy, or a good basis for comparison to learning strategy experiences you've had in the past. And again, hope you enjoy the hour.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jerry, and thank you for all the attendees joining. And I can say from years of this, helping clients that are more reactionary to the business challenge versus those who are more methodical and approaching it in a thoughtful way. And typically the latter results in greater cost efficiency as well as improved outcomes. So I'm hoping this was valuable for some of you. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Marlene for just some closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, so much for joining us today. I just wanted to remind you that we will be sending a recording of the webinar along with the slide deck out to y'all within the next day or two. Let's continue the conversation online as well. You can follow us on LinkedIn and also on Twitter at ttatraining.com. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. But thanks again for taking the time to chat with us, and we hope you have a wonderful day.